The palace of Athera Prime gleamed like a jewel under the light of the twin suns. Towers made of rose-colored crystal rose up like fingers reaching for the sky, their surfaces catching the sunlight and scattering it into 1,000 different colors. The city beneath was alive, vibrant, pulsing with a strange energy that only the Tzanith people could truly understand. The air was thick with the scent of alien flowers, and it shimmered with pheromones, a fragrance that made human lungs burn and eyes water. But none of that mattered now. Elias Ward had seen worse. He stood in the grand hall of the palace, staring out at the city, trying to ignore the pressure in his chest. The invitation he'd received wasn't what he had expected, nor what he wanted, but he didn't have a choice. The Tzanith weren't the sort of people you ignored, especially not a royal family member, and certainly not the princess. His boots clicked softly against the polished stone floor as he turned to face her. Princess Vayara, the heir to the Tzanith dominion, stood across from him, tall, poised, and absolutely untouchable. Her skin glimmered like translucent crystal, reflecting every beam of light in the room. Her 4 eyes glowed faintly in the dim light of the hall, each one tracking him with a focused intensity. He'd seen species with multiple eyes before, but nothing like this. The princess's gaze wasn't cold, but it wasn't warm either. It was assessing. Elias felt small in her presence. He was just a soldier, a human far from home. But in that moment, standing in front of this alien royal, he wasn't sure who had the upper hand. "You are the human warrior," Vayara said. Her voice was soft, like silk brushing against stone, but it carried authority, power wrapped in velvet. "The one who saved my convoy from the Void Raiders." Elias bowed stiffly like the soldier he was trained to be. "Just doing my job, Your Highness." His throat felt dry, but he pushed the nervousness down. He couldn't afford to show weakness here. Not now. She didn't seem to care for his formality. Her eyes narrowed, the pale light within them shifting as she took a step forward. "You misunderstand. You didn't just do your job, you saved me. That makes you special." Her voice dropped lower. "You are now part of my house. You are bound to me." Elias froze. "Part of your house, Your Highness, I don't think." "You do not think," she interrupted, her voice sharp. "And that's the problem. You think you are nothing more than a soldier. You think you are nothing more than a pawn in this war. But I see you human, and I know what you are. You are a warrior who defied the odds to keep me alive." She took another step forward. "And for that I will remember you. Forever." There was something in the way she spoke, something that made his pulse quicken. Her words were heavy, laden with meaning he couldn't quite grasp, but it was clear that they held power. He should have felt honored, grateful even, but all he could feel was an uncomfortable tightness in his chest. "I don't understand," Elias admitted. "I'm just a soldier, I'm not royalty, I don't belong here." Her gaze softened slightly, though her 4 eyes still watched him carefully. "Your kind always think you don't belong." There was a quiet sadness in her voice now, a sadness that caught him off guard. "But you do. You are more than you think, and you will learn that soon enough, Captain Ward." Elias swallowed hard, unsure of what to say. It was clear that Vayara was no ordinary princess. She was powerful not just physically, but in a way that was almost impossible to describe. The entire room felt like it was bending toward her will. He could feel it in the air, in his chest, in his bones. She wasn't just a ruler, she was a force. "I don't know what you mean, Your Highness," Elias said, trying to regain his composure. He wanted to back away, to step out of this strange, suffocating atmosphere, but his feet felt glued to the floor. It was as if her presence had wrapped itself around him, pulling him into a world that wasn't his own. She stepped closer again, her movements graceful, fluid, like she was walking through water. Elias couldn't help but feel like he was drowning. "You think I invited you here out of gratitude, Captain." Her voice was almost a whisper now, and she reached out, just barely brushing the sleeve of his uniform with her fingers. The touch was electric, sending a strange shiver up his spine. "No, I invited you here because I see something in you, something that my people have forgotten." Her gaze burned into him, deeper now, more intense. "I see truth." Elia's heart raced. Truth. Yes, she said softly, taking another step closer until they were standing face to face. In my world, we no longer know how to be human. We've forgotten what it means to feel, to fight, to sacrifice. Her voice dropped and she leaned forward, her eyes glinting like stars in the darkness. But you haven't forgotten. I can feel it in you. Elias took a breath, trying to steady himself, but the words weren't enough. He didn't understand why she was looking at him this way. He was just a soldier, a human. Why was she treating him like he was more? She stood there, waiting, as if the very air around them had thickened, charged with expectation. He could feel her stare digging into him, could feel her power vibrating in the air. And suddenly, in the heart of that strange alien world, Elias realized something. He wasn't just a soldier anymore. He was something else entirely, something she needed. And that terrified him more than anything. This is the first part of the story, pulling readers into a new world with emotional and tense moments, setting up the mysterious and intense connection between Elias and Princess Vayara. Would you like me to continue or make any changes? Elias didn't know how much time had passed since Vayara had spoken those final words. It could have been moments or hours. Time had no meaning in this palace of strange beauty and even stranger expectations. The air around him felt heavy, like it was pressing down on his chest, suffocating him in ways he didn't understand. He hadn't asked for any of this. He had only come to this planet to do his duty, to ensure the survival of his people, and to fight the war that had taken too many lives already. But this was something else entirely. Princess Vayara had not simply thanked him. She had not simply offered her gratitude, as any ruler might. No, she had made it clear that Elias was no ordinary soldier. He wasn't just a means to an end, a pawn on the board of some larger galactic game. She had treated him like he was part of something greater than he could have ever imagined, something that terrified him to his core. The princess's words echoed in his mind. I see truth in you. What did she mean by that? Was it her way of saying that she saw him as more than just a human, more than a warrior? Was he really someone worthy of this kind of attention, this kind of focus? His mind raced, each thought spiraling into another until he could barely breathe for the confusion. But then a voice broke through the fog. Touch me, human. It was Vayara's voice, soft but insistent, cutting through the silence of the grand hall like a blade through fabric. Elias blinked, his breath catching in his throat. He turned toward her, only to find her standing there just a few steps away. She was staring at him, her eyes now glowing faintly with an emotion he couldn't name. Her 4 eyes, each one seeming to see him differently, were locked on his every move. It felt as if they were peeling back the layers of his soul, exposing him in ways he hadn't allowed anyone to see before. Your Highness, Elias started, unsure of what to say. His mouth felt dry. The tension in the room was palpable, thick enough that he could taste it. You think I ask for your touch? Vayara's voice was cold now, commanding. She stepped closer, her translucent skin shimmering in the dim light. No, human, I do not ask. I demand. Elia's heart skipped a beat. She didn't just request his touch. She demanded it. Her voice wasn't soft now. It was full of authority, a ruler's command, wrapped in a quiet fury. A demand he didn't know how to refuse. The air felt heavier, if that was even possible. Elias could feel his chest tightening, his breathing becoming shallow. What could he do? How could he possibly say no? He wasn't prepared for this. He wasn't prepared for any of it. I don't understand, Elias said, his voice faltering despite his best efforts. Your people, your laws, they forbid it. Vayara's eyes softened, just for a moment, as if she could see the conflict in his gaze. Our laws are nothing more than chains, she said quietly, her words carrying an edge of sadness. They are made to hold us, to control us. But I am not like the others, Captain. I do not live by the same rules. Elias opened his mouth, but no words came out. He wanted to argue, to tell her that this was madness, that this wasn't right. But the truth was, There was something about the way she looked at him, something deep and knowing, something raw that made him want to obey. He had always thought of himself as a soldier, focused, unshakable, a man who had faced death without flinching. But this was different. This wasn't a battle with weapons or strategy. This was something else entirely. And for the first time in his life, Elias felt completely out of his depth. Vayara took a step closer, so close that Elias could feel the heat of her body, the faint hum of energy that seemed to radiate from her skin. He could hear her breath, soft and steady, matching his own. Her presence was overwhelming, like the weight of an entire galaxy was contained in that moment. "Touch me, human," she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper now, yet it carried the force of 1,000 stars. "Touch me and feel what no one else can. See the truth of who I am, who we are." Elias' mind reeled. He knew what she was asking, but could he do it? Could he risk crossing the line between them, breaking the barriers that separated them not just as species, but as beings from entirely different worlds? Could he touch her, knowing it could change everything? But then something inside him shifted. He had spent his entire life following orders, doing what was expected of him. He had fought wars, lost friends, and stood on the edge of death more times than he could count. But this was not a battle. This was something that demanded more than strength. It demanded something from the heart. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly. Vayara stood still, watching him with an intensity that took his breath away. She didn't say a word, but there was an understanding between them, a quiet acknowledgement that this moment meant something deeper than either of them could truly express. His fingers brushed against her skin, cold, electric, alive. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to stand still. Everything around them faded away, the palace, the stars, the war, even the fear that had gripped his chest since the moment he arrived. All that existed was the touch, that connection. Her skin was unlike anything he had ever felt, smooth and delicate, yet brimming with energy, like it held the power of 1,000 years in every cell. The pulse of her body seemed to sync with his own, as if their hearts were beating in unison. She closed her eyes, her breath catching, and for the first time, Elias saw something different in her. Not the princess, not the heir to an empire, but a woman, a person who had been bound by the same chains as everyone else, only to find freedom in the most unexpected of places. He gently pulled her closer, his other hand resting on her arm. "I don't know what this means," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "but I know this, whatever happens, I won't leave you." Vayara opened her eyes, her gaze softer now, the intensity replaced by something more vulnerable, more human. "And I will not leave you, Captain. Not ever." And in that moment, Elias realized that this wasn't just a demand. It was a promise that would change both of their lives forever. In this part, we deepen the emotional connection between Elias and Vayara, showing how their bond grows stronger as they begin to understand each other. Would you like to continue with the next part or make any? Elias had never been afraid of battle. He had faced the harshest of enemies and stood unshaken as his comrades fell around him. But standing in the heart of the Tizanath Palace, with Vayara's skin still burning against his fingertips, something new tugged at his chest, something he couldn't name. It was as if the touch had unlocked a door to a world he wasn't prepared to enter, a world full of emotions he didn't know how to handle. Her words echoed in his mind, "I will not leave you, Captain, not ever." But what did that mean? Was it just a promise, or was it something more? His mind raced, but his heart refused to let go of the feeling that had started to bloom between them. It was raw, uncertain, and yet undeniable. Vayara stepped back slowly, her eyes flickering with something deeper now, something more than the command of a ruler. Elias could see it, the vulnerability hidden beneath her flawless exterior. She was more than just the princess. She was a person. She was human in a way that surprised him. "I do not ask for this, human," Vayara whispered, her voice still soft but filled with emotion. "I do not need your pity or your care, but I have seen your soul in the battlefield, in your eyes when you risked everything to save me. And I know now there is more to you than the soldier they believe you to be." Her words sank deep into his chest, pulling at something inside him. Elias had always thought of himself as just another soldier, just another pawn in a war he hadn't chosen. But now, with Veyara's gaze on him, he felt like he was finally seen. Not just as a tool of war, but as a person, a human. "I never asked for your loyalty," she continued, her gaze never leaving his. "But it is there, isn't it? It is in your heart." Elias swallowed, feeling a lump form in his throat. He wasn't sure what he felt, but he knew this. He couldn't walk away from this connection. He couldn't pretend like this didn't matter. "I don't know what you see in me, Veyara," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "But I'm not going anywhere. Not now. Not after everything we've been through. I'm with you through this war, through whatever comes." Her eyes softened, and for a moment, Elias thought he saw a tear form at the edge of her eye. But she quickly blinked it away, the princess's mask returning, though a hint of something human still lingered. She was fighting it, but it was there, the emotion that connected them, the unspoken bond that neither of them had asked for, but that had grown between them all the same. "I will not let you die in this war, Elias," Veyara said firmly, her voice stronger now. "I will not let anyone take you from me." The weight of her words hit him like a hammer. She had made her promise, and Elias realized with a sudden clarity that she would move heaven and earth to keep it. But he also knew that he couldn't ask her to protect him, not when she had her own battles to fight. He wasn't some helpless soldier. He had his own fight to win, his own reasons to survive. "I won't die," Elias said, his voice full of conviction. "Not if I can help it. I have too much to fight for now." She stepped closer to him, close enough that he could feel her breath against his skin. There was no barrier between them now. No titles. No duty. Just two people, standing in the middle of a war-torn world, bound by a promise neither had intended to make. "You are not alone in this, Elias," Veyara said softly, placing her hand on his chest, where his heart beat fiercely. "We are bound by more than duty. We are bound by a truth I've never known until now." Elias felt something stir inside him, something he hadn't expected. It was fear, yes, but also something more. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't just a fleeting connection. Maybe it was something that would last. He didn't know how long it would last, but he knew it was real. "You don't have to carry this weight alone either," Elias said, his voice steady now. "I'll stand by you, Veyara. You're not just a princess to me. You're more than that." Veyara's gaze softened, and for a moment the walls she had built around herself seemed to crumble. She was no longer the ruler, no longer the cold, distant princess. She was a woman, with dreams and fears and hopes just like him. A woman who had been forced into a role she had never asked for. "I didn't want this," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I didn't want to be a figurehead, a symbol of power. I wanted to be free to choose my own path." She looked at him, her eyes filled with a quiet sorrow. "But I'm trapped, Elias, trapped in a world that doesn't know how to care for the ones who lead it." Elias took her hand gently in his, feeling the chill of her skin, the energy that surged through her even in moments of weakness. He wasn't afraid anymore. Not of her, not of the war, not of anything. "You're not trapped anymore," Elias said, his voice full of certainty. "I'm here, and I'll help you find a way out of this, whatever it takes." Veyara's eyes searched his face, and for a moment there was no war, no palace, no enemies. There was only her, only him. And in that shared moment, Elias knew that they were no longer just soldiers in a war. They were allies, partners, and maybe, just maybe, something more. The sound of distant alarms echoed through the palace, a reminder of the war that still raged outside. But for now, it was just the two of them, standing together in the quiet of the moment. And Elias knew that this war would be different for him, because no matter what came next, he wasn't alone. In this part, we continue to explore the emotional depth between Elias and Veyara, showing how their bond strengthens as they support each other through their shared pain. Would you like to continue with the next part or adjust anything in this one? The sky above Athera Prime burned with fire. The once peaceful twin suns seemed to falter as dark clouds rolled in, blocking their light. The distant roar of battle echoed from the city's outskirts, signaling the arrival of the Krell Ascendancy, a ruthless, bloodthirsty race bent on destroying the T-Xanath Dominion once and for all. Elias had known the war was coming. The Krell never stayed quiet for long, but seeing it unfold, watching the alien ships tear through the atmosphere like jagged shards of glass, was something else entirely. His heart pounded in his chest, and the air felt thick with the scent of burning metal and ozone. A storm was brewing, one that no one would be able to outrun. In the palace's war room, Vayara stood at the center, her eyes scanning the holographic display as it flickered in front of her. The maps and coordinates showed the Krell advancing on the capital, their ships already breaching the outer defenses. Elias, Vayara's voice cut through the tension in the room, soft but unwavering. We cannot lose this fight. If the Krell breach our walls, it will be the end of everything we know. Elias stood next to her, trying to steady his breath, but the weight of her words hit him like a physical blow. There was no room for failure. Not now. Not when everything was on the line. "Don't worry, Your Highness," he said, his voice steady, though he could feel the pressure building in his chest. "We'll hold them off. I'll make sure of it." Vayara glanced at him, her eyes searching his face. There was no fear in her gaze, only determination. "This isn't just about survival, Elias," she said quietly. "This is about more than just me or you. This is about everything we've ever known. If we lose, the Krell won't stop here." She stepped closer to him, her voice barely above a whisper. "I need you, more than I can say." Elias felt the weight of her words settle deep inside him. He had never thought of himself as a hero, never imagined he would play a role in saving an entire world. But here he was, standing beside the princess of a galaxy he barely understood, facing an enemy that was unstoppable by any conventional means. "You're not alone, Vayara," he said, his voice firm now, the uncertainty gone. "I'll fight with you until the very end." Her eyes softened, but there was no time for sentiment. The battle was already on their doorstep. The sound of battle grew louder as the hours passed. The air was thick with the hum of energy shields and the sharp crackle of weapon fire. In the streets of Athera Prime, the battle raged. T-Xanath soldiers fought with honor, but they were outnumbered and outgunned. The Krell's ships hovered above the city, releasing wave after wave of soldiers, their grotesque forms tearing through the defenses with terrifying precision. Elias, clad in his combat gear, stood in the front lines alongside the T-Xanath defenders, his rifle raised. His mind was focused, the noise around him fading into a distant roar. He was no longer just a soldier fighting for survival. He was fighting for something much bigger. He was fighting for her. Vayara's words echoed in his mind as he fired on the advancing Krell forces. "I need you, more than I can say." He had no intention of letting her down. Vayara, though not a soldier, stood beside Elias in the thick of the conflict. The princess had chosen to fight, to take her place on the battlefield, not as a symbol but as a leader. She held her ceremonial spear, its blade glowing with ancestral energy, and fought with a fury that matched any warrior. The T-Xanath soldiers around her were in awe, not just of her power, but of her courage. "Princess, you should not be here," one of her commanders shouted, but she ignored him, her focus unwavering. The Krell were everywhere, their hulking forms clashing with the elegant precision of the T-Xanath. Elias could see the fear in the eyes of the alien soldiers, but there was also something else, something more human. There was hope, and that hope was all he needed. Elias' rifle ran dry, the sound of empty chambers echoing in his ears. He dropped it and grabbed a nearby T-Xanath energy blade, charging into the fray with everything he had. He moved with purpose, his body moving almost instinctively, cutting through Krell soldiers with the fluidity of a man who had known war his whole life. But even as he fought, his eyes never left Vayara. She was a beacon in the chaos, cutting through enemies with deadly precision. But Elias could see it, the way she moved, the slight hesitation in her strikes. She wasn't just a warrior. She was a princess, a leader, and her mind was burdened with the weight of her people's survival. Elias reached her side just as a Krell warrior lunged at her from behind. Without thinking, he threw himself in front of her, his blade slashing through the Krell's arm, sending it crashing to the ground. "Stay close," Elias said through gritted teeth. "I'm not letting anything happen to you." Vayara met his eyes, a flash of surprise in her expression. For the first time since he had met her, she looked at him as if she truly understood the depth of his commitment. "I know," she whispered, her voice full of quiet gratitude. And for a moment, amidst the chaos of the battle, the world outside them seemed to disappear. It was just them, together, their hearts beating as one in the face of a war they could not avoid. The battle raged for hours, but the tide was beginning to turn. With the Xanath soldiers rallying around their princess and Elia's fearless leadership, the Krell were pushed back, their forces faltering. But even as victory seemed within reach, the real danger was yet to come. In the distance, the Krell's warship loomed, a monstrous vessel brimming with dark energy. Elias knew what that meant. The Krell weren't done yet. The war was only just beginning. And as the ground beneath their feet shook from the explosions of the final onslaught, Elias and Vayara shared a look that spoke of everything they had fought for, everything they were willing to sacrifice. They were no longer just soldiers, they were something more, and they would see this through, together. In this part, the stakes of the war escalate, and we see both Elias and Vayara pushed to their limits. Their bond strengthens as they fight side by side, and the conflict becomes a symbol of their unity. Would you like to continue with the next part or make any changes? The battle was far from over. The city of Athera Prime lay in ruins. Once beautiful buildings, now reduced to rubble, burned under the harsh glare of the twin suns, their fiery light reflecting off the smoke that choked the sky. The air, thick with the stench of scorched metal and blood, seemed to hang heavy around Elias. Every breath was a struggle, his chest aching from the weight of the fight that had taken everything from him. The ground trembled beneath his boots as he moved, the remnants of a once thriving city, now a ghost of its former self. He could feel it in the air. The Krell were not finished yet, and neither were the Xanath. Elias stood with Vayara by his side, the princess's usually composed demeanor shattered. Her clothes were torn, her skin marred with cuts and bruises from the fight, but her eyes, those 4 eyes that had always looked at him with such certainty, were filled with something different now. A deep, burning fear. They had just won a small victory, pushing the Krell back from the city's heart, but the real fight was still ahead. The Krell warship, massive and dark like a storm cloud, hovered in the distance, its engines humming with a terrifying energy. Elias knew what that meant. If they didn't stop it, Athera Prime would fall, and with it, the hope of the Xanath Dominion. "How much time do we have?" Elias asked, his voice hoarse as he checked his weapon, ensuring it was ready for what was coming. Vayara glanced up at the sky, her eyes narrowing in determination, though a faint tremble ran through her. "The Krell are preparing their final assault. They will strike soon, but we still have a chance." Her voice faltered slightly, and for a brief moment, Elias saw the fear behind her calm exterior. She was more than a princess, more than a leader. She was a woman, struggling with the weight of responsibility that threatened to crush her. She was trying to hold it all together for her people, for herself, but Elias could see the cracks forming. "You don't have to carry this alone," Elias said quietly, stepping closer to her. His voice softened, as though he could offer her some sort of peace, even if just for a moment. "I'm with you. We'll find a way to win." Vayara met his gaze, her eyes searching his face as if looking for something she could hold onto. There was no arrogance in her look now, no regal distance. There was only the raw, vulnerable woman who had fought beside him, whose heart had slowly begun to open to him in ways neither of them had expected. "I know," she whispered, "but if I lose this fight, it will be my fault. I will be the one who failed them." Elias shook his head, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. "No one can win every battle, but we fight because it's the right thing to do. We fight because of what's worth saving. You've already done more than most people could ever dream of. You've already saved so many." Her eyes softened, but there was no time for more words. A sharp, unmistakable sound filled the air, the shriek of enemy ships cutting through the sky. The final wave was upon them. "We don't have much time," Vayara said, her voice firm once more. The princess within her was back, and Elias admired the strength that came rushing back into her, pushing aside the fear. She wasn't just going to lie down and give up. Not ever. "We need to move now," she added, as she turned to face the battle once more, her spear raised. Elias nodded, determination flooding through him. He was not afraid, not anymore. The princess beside him had shown him what it meant to fight not just for survival but for the future, for hope, and he wasn't going to let that go. The ground shook as the Krell forces advanced, their monstrous forms stomping through the ruins. The sound of weapons fire, of energy blasts, and the screams of battle filled the air. The Xanath forces, weary but unbroken, stood in formation, ready for the final push. Elias, along with Vayara, stood at the front, prepared to make a stand. This was it. The Krell were coming with everything they had. It would be their last chance. Elias took a deep breath. His heart pounded in his chest as he gripped his energy blade, the weight of it strangely comforting in his hand. Beside him, Vayara's spear shimmered with glowing light, a beacon of hope in the darkness. She didn't look at him this time. She didn't need to. The bond between them was stronger than words. It was in their shared silence, in their synchronized movements as they prepared to face the enemy. "Remember what we're fighting for," Vayara said, her voice steady, her eyes locked on the horizon. "This is not just about survival. It's about saving everything we love." Elias didn't say anything. He didn't need to. He understood. With one last glance at the princess, he stepped forward, his boots crunching against the broken earth beneath him. The Xanath forces moved with him, their steps echoing in unison. The Krell were close now, their towering figures barely visible against the smoke and dust. Elias could see the glint of their weapons, their snarling faces twisted in anticipation. They were relentless, but so were they. The first Krell soldier charged toward them, and Elias was already moving. His blade sliced through the air with a precision that came from years of training, years of fighting for something greater. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. Beside him, Vayara moved like a storm, her spear cutting through the air with devastating force, each strike a promise that she would not go down without a fight. Together they fought as one. Their movements were fluid, synchronized, a dance of destruction as they pushed forward into the heart of the battle. The Krell were strong, but they were no match for the unity that had formed between Elias and Vayara. Each blow they struck was a declaration that they were not done. They would not fall. Not today. The battle raged on, but Elias felt something shift within him. There was no fear now, no hesitation. With every swing of his blade, he fought for Vayara, for her people, for the future they could still build. And with each moment, their bond grew stronger. The sky above might have been broken, but together they would mend it. In this part, the stakes are raised as Elias and Vayara face the final wave of Krell soldiers. The bond between them deepens, and their determination to fight together intensifies. Would you like to continue with the next part, or make any changes to this one? The battle had become a blur of movement, noise, and fire. Elias' mind was on autopilot, his every action driven by instinct. But as the hours stretched on and the Xanath forces began to tire, something else started to take hold, a quiet certainty, a feeling that began to burn within him. They weren't going to lose. Not because they had more soldiers, not because they had better weapons, but because they had something the Krell couldn't understand: hope. And in that moment, Elias realized that he was part of that hope. He wasn't just fighting for survival. He was fighting for Vayara, for the future she believed in. The battle had reached its peak and the Krell were beginning to falter. But there was still no sign of victory. They could feel it, the warship hovering above them, a dark presence that seemed to loom over the entire planet. If it came down, if it unleashed its full power, nothing on Athera Prime would survive. Vayara had made her choice. She had chosen to stay, to fight alongside Elias and her people. She had chosen to stand in the place where the line between victory and defeat blurred. And now, she stood at the edge of the battlefield, facing the warship that hovered ominously in the distance. Her grip on her spear tightened, her face set in a mask of determination, though Elias could see the exhaustion in her eyes. He made his way to her side, his heart pounding. He had been fighting for hours, but there was no fatigue in him now. He had already made up his mind. He wasn't going to let her face this alone. "We need to destroy that ship," Elias said, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. Vayara nodded without hesitation. "We do, but it will take more than just our forces to take it down. We need to hit it from the inside." Elias looked at her surprised. "Inside?" She met his gaze, her eyes filled with an unwavering resolve. "Yes, the Krell warship has a weak spot in its core, but to reach it we'll need to infiltrate the ship. I can do it, but I need you with me." For a moment, Elias didn't know what to say. The idea of sneaking onto an enemy warship, of infiltrating their heart and planting a weapon to destroy it, was madness. But when he looked at Vayara, he saw the same spark in her eyes that had kept him going all this time, the belief that they could win, no matter the odds. "I'm with you," Elias said, the words coming out without a second thought. "I'll follow you anywhere." Vayara smiled, but it was a tired smile. "Then let's end this, Elias, together." They made their way toward the Krell warship, using the cover of darkness and the remnants of the battlefield to hide their movements. Every step was heavy, every breath a struggle. They knew the risks. If they were caught, they wouldn't just lose the war. They'd lose everything. Elias' mind raced as they approached the warship, his heart beating in sync with the pounding of his boots. The ship was an immense, terrifying thing, dark, jagged, and pulsing with energy. The very air around it seemed to hum with power. There was no going back now. Vayara led the way, her movements swift and sure, though Elias could see the faint tremor in her hands. He wasn't sure if it was from fear or the weight of responsibility, but he didn't need to ask. He knew what it felt like to carry that kind of burden. They reached the base of the warship, hidden in the shadows. The T-Xanath forces were keeping the Krell distracted, fighting with everything they had. But this was their chance, their only chance. "Ready?" Vayara asked, her voice low. Elias nodded, his jaw set. "Let's finish this." Together they scaled the side of the ship, using the structures and remnants of the battlefield to climb higher. The metal beneath their fingers was cold, slick with the remnants of the battle. But they didn't stop. They couldn't. Not when so much was at stake. When they reached the top, they found an entrance, a small opening hidden beneath the ship's massive frame. Vayara worked quickly, using her knowledge of Krell technology to disable the security systems. Within minutes, they were inside. The interior of the ship was unlike anything Elias had ever seen. The walls were made of strange, alien materials that pulsed with a faint, eerie light. The air was thick with the scent of metal and something sharp, something organic. It felt wrong, like a place where no human should ever be. They moved cautiously through the corridors, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Elias couldn't help but feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He had fought many battles, but this felt different. This wasn't just a fight for survival. This was personal. This was about protecting everything he had come to care for. And it was about protecting Vayara. They reached the central core of the ship, where the Krell's power source lay. The energy in the room was overwhelming, a sickening pulse of darkness that seemed to fill every corner. Elias could feel the heat radiating from it, the power just waiting to be unleashed. "We're almost there," Vayara said, her voice steady despite the danger. "We need to plant the explosives on the core. It'll bring the ship down." Elias nodded, his heart racing as he moved to position the explosives. He could feel the tension in the air, the feeling that this was their final chance. If they failed, they would not make it out alive. As he finished placing the charges, Vayara stood by his side, her spear raised, ready to defend them if the Krell came. They were so close now, so close to ending the war, to freeing her people, to giving them a future. Elias turned to her, meeting her eyes. In that moment there was no fear, no doubt, just the two of them standing together in the heart of the enemy's stronghold. "We're doing this," Elias said, his voice full of resolve. Vayara's gaze softened, and for a moment the weight of the battle seemed to lift. "Yes, we are." And with that they activated the charge, setting the countdown in motion. The explosion would be the spark that destroyed the Krell warship, and with it, the heart of their enemy's power. In this part, Elias and Vayara make their move to infiltrate the Krell warship, working together to plant explosives that will destroy it. Their bond grows even stronger as they face the risks of the mission, knowing that their success means the survival of their people. Would you like to continue with the next part or adjust anything in this one? The countdown had begun. Elias stood beside Vayara, his heart pounding in his chest as the seconds ticked away. The explosives they had planted were set to destroy the core of the Krell warship, and with it, the heart of their enemy's power. But the weight of the moment was almost too much to bear. There was no going back now. The blast would be massive, and they had no idea if they would make it out alive. The hum of energy in the room grew louder, a low, sickening pulse that seemed to vibrate through his bones. The air was thick with tension. Every corner of the warship felt alive, like it was waiting for something to happen, something final, something that would change everything. Elias glanced at Vayara. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes, those four glowing eyes, told a different story. She was scared, just like he was, but there was something else in her gaze, determination, a fierce resolve. This was her world, her people. She had chosen to stand here beside him not as a princess, but as a woman willing to risk everything for a future. Elias had never felt more connected to anyone in his life. "We have to go," Vayara said, her voice steady despite the danger. She looked at the timer, her hand still gripping her spear with fierce determination. "The ship's core is about to overload. We don't have much time." Elias nodded, and together they turned and moved quickly toward the exit. The warship's metal walls seemed to pulse with an ominous energy, and the sound of distant footsteps echoed through the corridors. They weren't alone. The Krell were coming, drawn by the explosion, ready to make their last stand. But Elias didn't care. He wasn't running away. He was running toward the future, toward the promise he had made. The moment they stepped into the hallway, the alarms blared. "Warning, core breach imminent," the mechanical voice of the ship echoed. "Evacuate immediately." Vayara's eyes flared with urgency. "It's starting. We need to move faster." The two of them broke into a sprint, their boots pounding against the cold metal floor, the sound of their breaths and the rushing air the only things they could hear. The walls seemed to close in around them, and every second felt like an eternity. Behind them, the warship groaned as if it was coming alive with fury, but Elias didn't look back. He couldn't. They ran through narrow passageways, dodging debris as the ship began to shake violently, the vibrations making it harder to keep their footing. Elias could feel the heat building behind them, the pulse of destruction getting closer and closer. Vayara's spear glowed with an ethereal light as she led the way, her presence guiding him through the chaos. She was strong, stronger than anyone he had ever known, and in that moment he knew they were more than just allies in battle. They were partners, bound by something deeper than war, deeper than survival. They reached the final access door, and Elias hesitated for a second, his heart heavy with the weight of everything that had happened. He turned to Vayara, his eyes meeting hers in the flashing lights of the ship's emergency alarms. "Vay, if we don't make it out." She cut him off with a sharp look, her eyes fierce but filled with something else, something more than just courage. There was trust there, a trust that neither of them could explain, but it was real. The kind of trust that came from shared sacrifice, from fighting beside one another through the darkest moments. "We will make it out, Elias," she said, her voice steady, her hand briefly touching his. "We have made it this far together, and we will make it to the end." The door slid open, revealing the dimly lit tunnel that led to their escape pod. Outside, the battle still raged, the flashes of distant fire lighting the sky like a deadly storm. The explosion came without warning. The warship shuddered violently, a deafening roar filling the air as the core detonated. The shockwave hit them like a tidal wave, sending them both crashing to the ground. For a moment, everything was black. The world seemed to spin and tilt, and Elias felt himself losing consciousness. But then, through the smoke and the sound of the collapsing ship, he heard her voice. "Elias." He opened his eyes, blinking against the haze of dust and debris. Vayara was kneeling beside him, her face covered in soot, but her eyes still shining with that same unwavering strength. She reached for his hand, pulling him up with surprising gentleness. "We need to move now," she shouted, her voice urgent. Elias nodded, pushing himself to his feet. The escape pod was still their only chance. Together, they stumbled toward it, the ship around them groaning and creaking as it fell apart. Just as they reached the pod, the warship's massive frame split in half, sending another shockwave through the air. Elias and Vayara jumped inside the pod, the doors sealing behind them. They were safe for now. But the journey wasn't over. As the pod rocketed away from the wreckage, Elias stared out the small window, watching as the Krell warship burned in the distance. The battle was won. The war was over. The T-Xanath Dominion had survived. And with it something even greater, the bond between him and Vayara. The bond that had started in the heart of a battlefield, forged in the fires of war, and now here they were, alive, together. Elias turned to Vayara, his heart full, knowing that no matter where they went, no matter what came next, they would face it side by side. Not as enemies or strangers, but as partners, as something more. "We did it," he said quietly, his voice filled with awe. Vayara looked at him, her four eyes soft with emotion, her lips curving into a tired but contented smile. "Yes," she said, her voice steady despite everything they had been through. "We did." And as the pod sped away from the ruins of the Krell warship, Elias knew that their story, their fight, would become a legend. The tale of the human who touched the divine and the princess who never gave up. A story that would be told for generations. Because against all odds, they had found something more than just survival. They had found hope. In this final part, Elias and Vayara escape the warship as it explodes, securing victory for their people and solidifying their bond. The ending ties together their journey, emphasizing the strength of their connection and their shared future. Would you like to add anything or modify any part of the story?